and freshly brewed simmer, salt and buff flour extra,
Melted booby butter and salted butt flour indeed. Hello greater YouTube area and the surrounding internet regions, this is Killer Cardinal DA7. Whether you're a gamer or not, you may have heard that there's been some massive unrest in the gaming world, namely surrounding the issues of microtransactions, gambling style loot boxes, additional downloadable content purchasable in games, and the myriad ways the biggest publishers in the industry are trying to separate players from their money. With Warframe just putting out its brand new Plains of Eidolon update, I figured going back to a great example of a game that does its pay model perfectly made a whole lot of sense. I want to talk about things that Warframe does well and not so well relating to its business model, one of its most common comparisons in Destiny, analyze the ethics of paying more than base price, some of the motivations for both offering microtransactions and buying them, and discuss what we can do as well as what big companies can do to address these problems most ethically. To start with, for those who don't know about this game, Warframe is free to play. And for console players on PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, it doesn't require paid membership to PlayStation Plus or Xbox Live to play with other people, which means literally anyone interested in the game can download it at any time, play however much or little of it they want, they can join clans and participate with other players in all the content and not feel obligated to stick with it simply because of some monetary investment. The decision to play 5 minutes, 20 minutes, an hour, 5 hours, 150 hours or more is entirely on the shoulders of a potential player. They didn't invest any money, but they aren't wasting any money by uninstalling and never looking back. Now, while Warframe is free to play, some argue that it's mostly free to play. For one thing, many of the quests and just about all the content can be directly purchased. Also, I think at some point, I'm not sure if it's still like this or not, some of the later games quests require your account to be a specific mastery rank before some of them are unlocked. Mastery rank is a kind of gauge of how much you've accomplished. So how many nodes of the star chart map you've unlocked, how many quests you've completed, how much equipment such as weapons and companions you level up, etc. Essentially, this goes up the more stuff you experiment with. And if you buy a bunch of equipment and XP boosters, the more gear you have available to upgrade and the faster you do it, the faster your mastery rank can rise and the faster you can tackle more and harder content. Unfortunately, while things like resources and crafting materials can be stored nearly infinitely, the game doesn't afford you many slots with which to store functional equipment like warframes and weapons, and there are tons of those in the game. So while you need to level up as much gear as possible to raise your mastery rank, collecting it all from the very beginning is not possible without way more slots, which you typically need platinum to unlock. Platinum being a currency you can get by either trading with other players or more commonly purchased with real world money. So while just about all the quests and activities are accessible to players without spending a single cent, it does take a while to unlock stuff and paying does speed it up, that part is undeniable. Though playing with friends and helping each other speeds it up as well. Paying in this game feels much less necessary than other games, it's a choice rather than being required. As a friendly tip to those who haven't played Warframe before but are interested in doing so and are adamant about not spending any money, before you dive in and play, read as much as you can about the existing 34 different Warframes and tons of weapons and companions and mods available. Decide on a playstyle and build that you feel strongly about, go after getting that particular stuff as long as it may take to do so, and then anything else you acquire or craft can temporarily fill up empty slots as mastery rank fodder that you just level up to max and then get rid of. There are so many different weapon and Warframe styles, there's absolutely at least a couple that will strike your fancy. With this method, you'll be sticking to a single Warframe and gear build, and for some that can get a bit boring. The trade-off is that platinum slots don't matter nearly as much, and playing that way doesn't require any money spent. It depends on where your priorities lie. Using different Warframes and weapons offers more gameplay variety, and some Warframes and weapons are better suited for different situations to make some objectives easier. Then again, some players really hate some Warframes and weapons, they don't care about those, and they only want to use particular ones. It's up to you and how you want to do it. Like I said, Warframe offers that choice to people. Personally, I tried to go as long as possible without spending any money in Warframe. I was going to try my hand at trading in Maru's Bazaar for platinum, however I've never really been a fan of working any game's real-world or in-game economy to get anywhere. I don't like immersing myself in highly detailed fantasy action and role-playing games because they're Wall Street simulators, or because I like seeing price check pop up in global chat every couple seconds. More power to you if you like economies. I'm not judging anybody's methods, especially in this game. Economies just aren't for me. So because of the amount of time I'd spent, namely around 150 hours, as well as the powerful experiences I'd had with the main quest, I decided I got to a point where I practically felt guilty not paying, so I went ahead and spent 50 bucks, which translated to about 1,000 platinum. All I really bought with that is slots so that I could craft more equipment, and as many slots as I bought, I still have a little under 500 platinum to play with. While 50 bucks may not have afforded me much in terms of straight equipment to purchase directly, in other words already crafted and ready to use gear, 50 bucks worth of platinum is proving to be a great value and gives me more personal objectives to work toward. So not only is there a completely free option, the options to pay have different levels for people wanting different amounts and types of gameplay. You can either 100% grind and farm, 100% pay, or somewhere in between that suits your personal preferences. Had I only spent $5, $10, or even just $20 on platinum, it still would have afforded me a bunch of slots to give me wiggle room to craft. I didn't need to spend $50, I just knew it would come in handy. For a little perspective on that amount, let me share with you what I've spent on Destiny, keeping in mind I'm not wildly proud of this. Destiny 1 base game I paid 60 bucks, so already 10 more than I've spent on Warframe. Destiny 1 expansion pass was another 35, Taken King another 40, Rise of Iron probably another 40, Destiny 2 with that expansion pass was at least $90, so between the first and second Destiny games I spent $265 total, as I didn't buy any silver or other microtransactions there. That $265 was just to be able to play that content at all. And okay, for any Destiny fans hearing this, I will grant I have had some fun with Destiny 1 and 2. I can't deny the loot hunt had some fun moments, some of the gear was okay, and the gunplay was unquestionably solid. Even some of its critics will agree with that aspect. Was it powerful enough fun to be worth $265 though? Not really. Both Destiny games only came with 3 main classes in terms of variety, with 3 total subclasses per formal class. In the first game, the 3rd subclass was only available after purchasing one of the expansions. Yeah, I enjoyed the fundamentals of Destiny, but none of the action or story were super engaging or deep or different. Potential was through the roof, but it just didn't stick the landing. The lore was left largely unspoken and didn't have enough time spent on it in the first game. The ridiculous Grimoire cards that were only available on the website was a complete joke. It would have taken barely any effort to patch in a little kiosk to view by the speaker in the tower so players could read their cards' lore stories in the game itself, but no, they didn't even bother with that. Then in the second game, they did an almost full reboot to bring in PC players who hadn't been playing for the past 3 years, so pretty much everything that happened in the first game, which could have been marvelously explained, we could have finally seen the consequences of our actions. That opportunity was paved right over with the new narrative with Dominus Gall taking the Guardian's light. Admittedly, it was a decent, albeit short story. It was well acted, well directed, had some epic and emotional moments in and of itself. I'll give it respect where it's due there. But it was way too isolated and distanced from the huge implications of the Black Garden and the expulsion of Oryx from the first game's content, not to mention that its short length as a story took all the wind out of Gall's sails as a villain. Maybe Destiny 2's expansions will be different from Destiny 1's expansions and how much they add. We'll have to wait and see. I do intend to check them out when they release, especially since I bought them already. But that's a lot of money to put on hope, and I've reached the end of my rope on that. This is gaming. Gaming is supposed to be fun. It's not supposed to be a collection plate that we dump money into, praying the pastor sends our pleas to the right lords so that maybe they'll come true. Now, not to focus too much of the criticism on Destiny, as good as Warframe is both fundamentally and creatively, it does have some people looking below the surface. For some people, this directly relates to the pay model, but the amount of XP grinding and resource farming involved in Warframe is pretty heavy. Especially once you finish all the available quests, there is a significant amount of repetition, not only in locations and tile sets, but also mission types, of which there are a bunch, though most kind of resemble each other. I'll go through most of them to explain. Exterminate. Kill X amount of bad guys. Defense. Keep X from being destroyed by killing all the bad guys that come at you. Mobile defense. Keep 3 different points from being destroyed by killing bad guys. Survival. Don't die for as long as possible while either killing bad guys or avoiding them. Interception. Keep 4 different points from being taken over by bad guys all at once for a certain amount of time. Excavation. Keep X from being destroyed for Y amount of time by killing bad guys and recharging X with power cells. Defection and rescue are basically escort missions, and escort missions are basically protect this moving target by killing bad guys as the moving target runs to the exit. From here though, we do start to see some creativity spark up. I masochistically enjoy hijack. That's a variation on an escort where you need to protect a big thing that moves only by draining your shields. That's a rough way to mix things up and keep things dangerous. Spy missions tend to be more involved and delicate. They award a great amount of XP by making good use of level design and pushing the agility of your Warframe. They're probably my favorite mission type. To get the most out of them, they require precision, stealth, and environmental awareness as you slip through laser grids, sneak around guards, hack panels, and steal data from up to 3 different rooms, and then escape, stirring up as little trouble as possible. They're essentially the perfect test for a space ninja. Then there's related stuff like syndicate missions, which are the same ones I just mentioned, only with representatives following you from the respective syndicate the mission's for. One benefit is that syndicate missions have enemies of slightly lower level than the planet usually features. As another helpful tip for new people, these can be good when you need to farm crafting materials like nanospores early on in your journey, but ultimately the mission types are the same. There's void fissures where you can open up relics that you've collected for a chance to get blueprints for parts to build prime equipment that you would otherwise need to trade for or buy with real money. That's definitely worth it, as the prime stuff not only functions better than their standard counterparts, they also look much cooler. Though aside from the random bursts of stronger enemies and the fissure missions themselves, they still function the same as most others. There's invasions. Those are short-term community events where you choose a side in a brief conflict, usually between the Grineer and Corpus enemies, or one of those groups against the infestation. And if you complete 3 missions for them in the given map node, you get an item sent to your inbox once the community helps resolve the conflict by pushing one side or the other to victory. Usually the item is a resource that isn't easy to come by, like a Fieldron or Detonite injector, or even better, parts to build Vandal and Wraith weapons, which are stronger versions than their standard counterparts. The mission types themselves, again, are the same types I mentioned before. However, you will have Grineer or Corpus units fighting alongside you, and very often the maps will add hazards like fire and destruction around and enhance the theme of it being an embattled area. So while the mission types issue can be a bit shallow for some, what they tend to do with those mission types and the variety of purposes you could have for completing them is certainly better than other games which don't go nearly far enough to give you better reason for all the repetition. The new Plains of Eidolon update features a big open zone to explore, which is a huge breath of fresh air compared to most of the claustrophobic spaceship levels or narrow on-planet corridors players have been traversing in this game. Warframe is known for its lightning-fast movement, bullet jumping, flips, somersaults, dodges, and wall leaps, and in the plains, putting your speed to use is crucial. at least before you get the Arcwing launcher, and then you can just fly around anywhere you want. Fighting the enormous Eidolon monsters seems pretty epic and involved as well, with different steps and phases to endure. Also, I do like how each bounty you take on the planes for Ostron standing points is at minimum a 3-step process, even though most of the steps are kind of the same as the missions. Kill all the bad guys in a camp, kill a slightly stronger bad guy, scan a few things, escort a drone or prisoner, open some caches, etc. Although the Plains of Eidolon update does add in things that most MMORPGs have had for years, like fishing and mining, which takes this game from being mostly instance-based gameplay to a more open-ended feel. It puts Warframe on the same wavelength as heavy-hitter MMOs like Warcraft. Little by little, Warframe seems to be taking baby steps to encroach on pretty much every other genre it could compete with, as opposed to other games that stay within the boundaries of their genre without rocking the boat. It's really impressive to see a developer like Digital Extremes be bold enough to take their game to these places, branching out further and further to continue bringing in new people. Overall, the nicest thing about that massive update for Warframe and all their other massive updates in the past that have included new quests to complete, Warframes and weapons to craft and acquire, all of them have been free. All you have to do is wait for the update to go live, download, install, and you're in. No pre-ordering, no wondering if you have to scrounge up cash to stay an elite member of the club, no need to participate in the pyramid scheme to convince friends to put their money down if they don't feel like it. It's free. You have the game, you're in the club. Done. Now, if you haven't had fun collecting new Warframes and equipment, chances are the amount of grind and repetition here can become a bit grating and cause some people to quit, and those people who do quit usually connect the dots of that boredom from the grind to the pay model. They see it as just as manipulative as when full-price games do similar things. This game does somewhat mimic others that feature heavy amounts of grinding and repetition, as well as long crafting times that have a convenient platinum price to speed up, all of which is seen as intended to push people's patience to their breaking point, at which time they just pay more to get what they want faster. Thing is, even if Digital Extremes really is testing your patience to get you to pay for equipment or platinum like other games do, the fact remains that you're not paying anything up front just to be able to play at all. So even though Warframe offers similar payment options that other games offer in terms of using real-world currency to get what you want or just get them faster, you're not initially out any money just to feel compelled to pay more later. Like I said, paying anything feels like more of a formal option, which can easily be put off for quite some time, as opposed to being required to pay up front, getting bored at feeling like you're making absolutely no progress, then paying more just to make that initial purchase feel better because you've bought extra things that are fun to use, but should probably have been included in the base offering to begin with. That's why I was able to justify paying $50 for platinum. I didn't feel I had no other option but to pay, but even if I felt $50 worth of platinum equated to some base cost of the game, it's still far below what I paid just to play even one Destiny game, and I'm still currently getting more value for my money as I still have platinum to spend on whatever I want. Not to mention the motivation of paying is different. In games coming out lately when progression is tied directly to the randomness of a loot box, a person may not get any actual gameplay enhancement or power unless they're lucky, practically forcing them to pay for an edge even over the system itself. Meanwhile, my friends helped me farm the parts for my Prime Warframes from relics directly. We knew exactly where they were. It was a social activity. I didn't pay a dime for the ones I have. Why pay for them when you can join other people, especially your closest friends who also aren't required to pay any money for entry, and get those things for free? Free-to-play games often have a stigma attached that they're low quality, not only because of the long string of cheesy free-to-play games that have been in existence, but if a small company doesn't have enough money funding its development, it can't always keep developing. They can't make top-of-the-line sound effects, they can't hire top-tier voice actors, they can't always use the best and brightest animation technology. With less or no money, they can't add tons and tons more content, and if they do, it still may not look as flashy and eye-popping as top-shelf AAA games do. It's why so many indie games go with, quote, retro or pixel art styles. They're way cheaper and easier to animate. Granted, some pixel art games can offer a ton more depth and creativity than some games with motion capture and photorealism, so in at least some cases, it doesn't hinder them to use a retro style at all. On the other hand, AAA companies teach us the hard way that having tons of money doesn't mean they'll feel like putting those millions of dollars to any good use. Big companies love to hype up games with big productions, presentations, trailers, promotion, commercials, anything that gets people looking at their game, and once consumers pre-order and invest a ton of money, the game doesn't really need to have any substance, heart, passion, art, or anything really engaging or unique, because a person who's invested, especially in this day and age of identity politics, will be initiated as a fanatic. They'll become a fanboy, a fangirl, maybe even fon-binary if male and female pronouns aren't your thing. The point is, whoever they are, they'll defend their purchase to the death. They'll refuse to let anyone make them feel bad about their purchase or admit they made a mistake. Of course, while AAA publishers are shoveling out any overly monetized piece of software connected to a license that sells or has enough hype behind it, knowing being a follower carries a competitive level of fanaticism, you'd think that free-to-play games would be filling up with players looking for cheaper alternatives. And once in a while they do, and thankfully Warframe is one of those cases. It's only been growing in popularity, and since this game is free, it removes the purchase decision that would need to be made. There's no mistake to be made in trying it out, yielding far less ability to blame the developers for tricking you into checking it out if it's not your cup of tea. Warframe manages to walk the line between being free and accepting money at exactly the right balance. You can gain access to the bulk of the entire game outside of some skins and a few other cosmetic parts that you can only buy. Granted, you have to put in the time to play to get most of the good equipment without paying, but even if you pay, the idea is that you spend lots of time playing. So you either pay first, then spend lots of time enjoying what you bought, or you spend time playing to get what you want later for free, then have fun with your new stuff. In other games, paying is the main priority, and once you've paid, the enjoyment is kind of irrelevant to the publishers, whereas here spending time playing is the priority, and Digital Extremes would rather you enjoy the game enough to feel like paying them anything later, instead of having to convince you to pay first and hoping you like it later. Warframe's mystery, lore, and enigmatic nature, along with the reworked star chart map through the galaxy to help guide you along the path to the next milestone, the next boss, the next planet, the next set of challenges to overcome, it all keeps you moving through, and it's all intriguing. Not all the quests follow a single narrative path that continues the events following your awakening after being captured by Captain Vor in the beginning cutscenes, but a lot of them provide great world building opportunities and fascinating additional lore that expand the universe. They fill in holes and present more questions. The few quests that explain more about Warframes, Tenno, and the Lotus were phenomenally done, and the best ones by far are both long into the game, taking at least a good 20 or so hours minimum, if not closer to 30 to reach and complete on one's own. But again, they're free. There's no rush to get there quickly to beat the company to this next big game coming out, or else you'll get left behind. Every new update adds to a single game, so it's best to take your time and savor it all. Complete things at the pace that's comfortable for you. With new AAA games coming out lately like Star Wars Battlefront 2, Middle-earth Shadow of War, Call of Duty, World War II, all including microtransactions, the talk of sports games like Madden and FIFA charging subscription fees, others doubling down and tripling down on loot box gambling, does this mean that microtransactions themselves are innately unethical? They're really not. It's more the deceptive and manipulative implementation that's unethical than the fact that they're there. As hard as my favorite YouTube personalities rail against them, most would agree that if those microtransactions are done in a fair way, they can be okay. So how are they kept ethical? Well, a few ways. If they add to what vast features and choices a game already has standard, instead of only introducing features when you pay. If they offer parallel options to tap into a variety of gameplay preferences, instead of upsetting game balance or producing a pay-to-win option where money puts you in an immediate position of being unstoppable, making challenge trivial with a few dollars or more. If you get to keep things you've purchased instead of them being one-time use or consumable, which only begs you to pay more to restock what consumables you previously purchased because that's the only way to progress. If you know exactly what you're buying and the money you pay isn't used on a random number generator to decide whether you even get close to what you want. If microtransactions are done with all these guidelines in mind, they're far more ethical than when a game has a massive cover charge, then dangle shit you need in front of your face to invest more money, and then you only have a chance of getting what you want, and then pretty much never get it. At least when you buy things in Warframe, you know exactly what you're getting. It says exactly what it is in the description before you purchase. Or you can buy Platinum that you can use on anything you want in the market. Randomized loot boxes, on the other hand, are paying money and not having a guarantee you'll get what you want. Or if you don't want to pay anything in Warframe and still unlock almost everything, there are usually specific ways to target the items and blueprints necessary to get those things. That's player choice. Warframe does both. Some people like grinding and farming and are willing to do it for everything. Others would rather pay a little money and grind and farm for just the exact things they want. Warframe provides both options to people coming on board, and those options are in a game that's unquestionably crafted with heart at the core. When a company like Digital Extremes can have the type of loyalty and satisfaction in their player base, the question for me becomes, why are big publishers like EA and Warner Brothers and Ubisoft, etc., loading their games so full with microtransactions, paywalls, and electronic things for people to buy and risking pissing off more and more consumers? Is it really all just greed for obscene amounts of capital? If that's the case, well, the easiest way of solving the problem is just shut it all off permanently, right? Simple as pie. It certainly must seem like greed to a lot of people, and I'm not ruling out the idea that big publishers are seething for our cash. When a representative from DICE working on Battlefront 2 was asked about the loot box progression in that game, their response was, well, beta phases are about trying new things and figuring out what the best methods are. When that's the most honest attitude you have when talking about microtransactions and tying progression to random loot box rewards, of which people can acquire more by paying even more real money, it gives people a bad impression of your work. It makes people think that there's more emphasis in figuring out how to monetize than craft a well-balanced game. But worse yet, that sentiment is less and less hidden. It's just out there in the open now, which understandably makes many members of the gaming community who want the purity and fairness of gameplay to be untouched enraged. However, when that player base says, just shut them off and keep them off, I feel like some of the issue may be getting missed. I mentioned a few videos ago that WWE is really struggling, and I know that there are plenty of fans who think that just because they're a multi-million-dollar worldwide company that they aren't in trouble, and can't possibly be in trouble, but ratings and ticket sales have been tanking compared to where they were when I was in high school during the Attitude Era. The programming isn't nearly as good as it could be, and despite what some say, they're not struggling because of the lack of a TV MALSV rating. It's not because the female wrestlers aren't getting naked at the drop of a hat. It's not because performers aren't using dirty words on TV as much anymore. And it's not because blood and guts aren't being smeared all over the canvas in every match. WWE just needs to do more big, radical, and different things sometimes to get themselves out of the rut they've been in. Like letting the Wyatt family control the show for a good 6-month plus run, instead of just being hacky villains twirling their mustaches. Or hey, I don't know, maybe turn John Cena heel like people have been begging for years, just a random thought. But what else contributed to that rut they're in? Well, part of it was during the Monday Night War, when they were going head-to-head with WCW. Eric Bischoff, while part of WCW, introduced the idea of doing way more pay-per-view events per year to increase their income. And at the time, that worked great. Pro wrestling was the most popular it had ever been in history, so of course, doing more pay-per-view events was a great idea back then. Fast forward, WWE buys WCW, they stand tall as the champion of pro wrestling, but as ratings slipped and mainstream interest dwindled, holding all those huge events was only causing them to compress storylines that needed more development to being uninteresting, short-sighted messes that don't go anywhere, which causes more damage to their brand than they help. Sometimes even the people in charge aren't invested enough to commit to letting storylines finish gracefully. Every time I see an article about Vince McMahon being, quote, furious about this or that talent being pushed a certain way or having a hissy fit backstage over some minute detail, I just think, well, yeah, of course he's furious. Fans want something he doesn't think they should have. He thinks it's as easy as just marketing people as, quote, good guys or, quote, bad guys, and that's, quote, good enough to bring in billions. Outside of their development brand NXT, WWE has largely turned into a swag-pushing fashion line more than the compelling pro wrestling product it used to be in its heyday. People walk down the aisle in their brand new ensemble. Oh look, here we have Xavier Woods from the popular New Day stable sporting his new fall attire. Fabulous! Buy this and all the new outfits advertised in our 3-hour weekly fashion show Monday Night Raw on WWEshop.com. The AAA game industry is in a similar predicament. Little by little over the years, bigger companies have been cutting costs, cutting corners in development, releasing way more huge games per year, or just releasing the same amount in worse and worse states. They've been leaning far too heavily on big games that sell well regardless of how unnecessary new installments are creatively, and on holiday seasons or other rushes to optimize sales, and while front-loading their games with additional streams of income used to be them just bringing in a little extra cash on games that have reliably sold in the past, nowadays, that extra income is expected and needed to meet projections. It's baked into bottom lines. To them, installing even more microtransactions seems like a solution, but it's only proven to be a band-aid to heal the health of those companies and the reliability of those sales behind the curtain, which may actually be failing significantly, along with their interest in the art of games, which likely has already died and rotted away. Sure, some of them may be rolling in money, that doesn't mean they're successful. The fact that there was enough fan backlash attached to Battlefront 2 that they temporarily removed microtransactions may look like a good sign that they see some error in their ways, but the microtransactions in Battlefront 2 are absolutely going to come back, and when they do, it won't be any more ethical than it was when they were there in the first place. I, as well as many others, see thousands and thousands of players getting addicted to paying money in their favorite games or franchises is a major problem that big publishers need to take responsibility for. But the big companies who present these options are not only just as addicted as the players to these features, but in some cases, the addictions those big companies have to this seems like the only thing keeping them motivated. It's like when some people say America has a, quote, oil addiction. If you ask most people in America if the United States should go after countries that have lots of oil so we can grab it all for ourselves, most would probably say no. However, if you get rid of oil, America runs out of gas to run its cars. Work grinds to a halt. I'm not trying to justify America staying dependent on oil, but undoubtedly if you take it away cold turkey, problems arise and need to be dealt with first in order to give us an out from the oil. Same thing here with gaming. It's almost as if big publishers bank on the money they make from those microtransactions, and if they don't see that huge increase in income, their anticipated budget for next year is going to be less, their available assets to spend on next year's development cycle are less, shareholders or sponsors may pull away, seeing less profit from their endeavors. They'll be in even more trouble, and all because of the assumptions we make that they're swimming in silos of coins like Scrooge McDuck. Like the oil analogy, I'm not trying to justify microtransactions here. I completely agree that some of those publishing company executives are greedy assholes with no interest in video games other than being commodities to hook people assigning over their firstborns for a package of pop culture emotes. I just want to understand the problem, and part of that problem is, even if those developers or publishers or both genuinely wanted to get rid of microtransactions completely, it may be a more difficult process than we think, and figuring out more about the problem could help everyone involved. Here's a related factor to consider outside of just the money. Time. Let's say Square Enix introduces a brand new game at E3. It's an extensive presentation, a good 10 plus minutes, gameplay, features, cutscenes for story and character context, the whole deal. All of it looks fucking amazing. You know as well as I do, truly amazing games aren't just thrown together overnight. They take time. A lot of time. Some people may be big enough fans of Square Enix games to play the rest of their library in anticipation for the new title coming out, but that new one may be 2 years out, 4 years out, sometimes more. They do the presentation because they want to generate or at least gauge interest, but players want to identify as being a player of that game. They hate having to wait. And in the meantime, while Square Enix is putting millions of dollars into development and spending even more on new presentations and commercials for this new game to keep interest up, they're getting back literally nothing from all that hype. Zero. I'll gladly agree that the vast majority of microtransactions in full price games are unethical, but many gamers these days are used to games getting massive hype to the point where if they don't get enough promotion, the public thinks they don't matter and sometimes don't bother giving them a cursory glance. It's easy for us to tell them, no, you just keep working on that game until it's ready. Take as long as you need. That's usually me. I'm one of the many people who say that all the time. Keep working on the game until it's perfect. Don't release it in a shitty state. Polish it until it's ready for release with as few bugs or problems as possible. Of course, the longer they sit on it, the longer they have to wait to make anything back on their investment. On the other hand, it's just as easy for us as players to tell them, why don't you just release it already? Fix it with patches later. I want to play it. They can respond that they're still working on it and and risk public interest on top of the money they pour into development and promotion over years and years, or they release it way too early and risk it being a buggy, glitchy, unbalanced piece of shit that gets bad reviews and destroys player loyalty. I don't mean to sound sympathetic to big AAA game companies, but they are damned if they do and damned if they don't to some degree. To bring this back around for a second, this is another reason why Warframe has worked so well. Granted, the perpetual quote beta state the game has been in for years is stretched thin as fuck. I'm not even sure that's still the official story or not. All I know is, at the current moment, playing during the Plains of Eidolon update, there is currently more content at Warframe than most AAA games, without any question. The vast majority of that content is 100% free if a player invests enough time, which is usually far below the amount of time it would take to get most of the DLC stuff in other games. And even if Digital Extremes is still pushing the game as a quote beta, as some features do feel a bit unfinished and not fully fleshed out, people can pick it up and play anytime they want and still feel like there's a ton to keep them busy. Sure, we have to wait for updates, and they have pulled one or more soon TM situations, projecting a release date or month as soon and then pushing out more months, but they manage that by putting out regular dev streams and primetime videos on Twitch and YouTube, which present far more transparency than most AAA publishers offer. Yeah, they don't always give players the answers they want to hear. The community will bug them with questions about this or that, and they'll do a bit of dancing around so they don't have to commit to any promises they can't keep. I can understand and respect that. Big and small companies both do it, but they're at least keeping players in the loop of what they're working on, providing sneak peeks and the new things they're developing, and overall engaging the community as if they're people as opposed to a snake oil peddler addressing the public from a podium really far away. Digital Extremes has had immense success with Warframe, and while much of it has to do with the game's pay model, it's also about their handling of game mechanics, free updates, and the transparency of their developers, some of those things having nothing to do with actual gameplay, but just reassuring players that the game is being worked on by real human people who care about what they're creating. I'm sure there are a couple publishing reps who care about the games they push at E3, but for the majority, it's just business. Activision easily makes more money on a single Call of Duty release than Digital Extremes makes in microtransactions from Warframe over a year, and player loyalty may not pay bills or line pockets, but that loyalty keeps people coming back reliably for more Warframe, while Call of Duty struggles to figure out how to give people enough of what they want to keep paying for quote new installments, but not too much of what they want so they don't buy anymore. Loyalty in a community means those players have a great amount of faith that the people in charge are working hard at making the game as good as it could be, and they're looking to improve it beyond a base level of greatness, as opposed to improving it to just barely playable levels. How much money has CD Projekt made from just Witcher 3 and its expansions, compared to how much money Activision has made from Destiny and its associated microtransactions? We can figure Activision made more money in that comparison, right? Does that mean Activision is more successful? Their most dedicated fanatics are in it for the long haul, sure. Though I bet almost anything that when CD Projekt releases Cyberpunk 2077, most of those Witcher 3 fans who saw how dedicated those devs were to fixing Witcher by listening to player feedback about problems as big as game-breaking glitches to issues as small as inventory management and font size, sometimes fixing things as quickly as less than a week, Cyberpunk is going to be a pretty massive success, and I have a ton of faith that game and its devs will 100% earn it. Even though people encourage widespread pre-order boycotts, that is a game I'm likely to pre-order, mainly because of the faith that company has instilled in its players. It may be exceptionally hard to quantify community loyalty, but it matters a ton, and it only gets stronger when players see that their concerns are being addressed and just how much work the developers are putting in, or how much they're allowed to by the publishers. After all, smaller companies like Digital Extremes and CD Projekt Red can probably afford to take on longer endeavors like those because they have more freedom to do so. Warframe is developed and published by Digital Extremes. Witcher and Cyberpunk are developed and published by CD Projekt. They seem to want to focus a lot more on making fewer amazing experiences as opposed to companies like EA and Activision who take the same tack WWE takes, putting on 13 to 15 pay-per-views across a 12-month year and are disappointing more and more people each time they do. EA and Activision have their hands in lots of huge budget projects, and they all have to sell well in order for them to make expected projections and meet bottom lines, and one of the only ways they can do that is to feature microtransactions, which is only doing more harm than good at this point, even if it doesn't seem that way to them. If big publishers are tapping the microtransaction vein in the same way America taps the oil vein, in the same way drug addicts tap, well, literal veins, think of it this way. Addicts in the end want to feel good. They may or may not want to turn to crime or rob or cheat people, but if it gets them what they need, they feel way more justified in doing it anyway. Sometimes those addicts are us, the players, and we get addicted to the games we play and pay way more than we should. Sometimes those addicts are the ones making the games, and no amount of cold turkey is going to make them turn their backs on microtransactions permanently. I don't have a wild amount of experience with addiction directly, but you know how it goes. You've seen enough shows about addiction. What happens when an addict goes cold turkey? Withdrawal. Battlefront 2 will ultimately be a relapse for EA. The even bigger problem that I see here that prevents publishers from doing away with microtransactions for good is that they stand to make way more from a single player's purchase of a single game than just the price of the game itself, which admittedly can be an alluring prospect. But even worse still than that, both for us and them, is that the more money they make from a single purchase of a single game, the less units of the game they actually have to move to make any money at all. The total they bring in sounds really impressive though. Oh gosh, Call of Duty World War II bringing in $500 million at launch. That's insane. What's the breakdown though? How much of that comes from units? How much came from microtransactions? And then compare that to their actual budget. How much did the game itself cost to develop? How much does it cost to promote? How much does it cost to distribute? I'm sure people hear that $500 million amount and think most of it is just from game sales, which I'm sure Activision just loves loves people to think. But in some cases, like with Destiny, when you ask those reps how many units they sold, they danced around that shit. How many actual physical concurrent players are online at any given time, Activision? Well, here's an infographic. Look how many aliens you've killed. Does that answer your question? I don't need math to demonstrate how bad this can be, but take any single game and its base asking price. No DLC, expansions, or microtransactions, so around $60 these days, right? Now take the same game, look up every piece of DLC or additional bit of content it has, add up what all of those microtransactions would cost total. Pretty ridiculous, no? Big publishers' priorities are on getting more out of individuals and less on growing their community of players. Gonna take you back to the Stone Ages for a moment, but it used to be that in order for games to be successful, or if companies wanted their games to make more money, they needed to have, create, and reach a wider and broader fan base to sell more copies. Visibility was almost built into that dynamic. Moving more units to more people broadened that reach because more people needed to buy the game, play the game, have the game, borrow the game, etc. Eventually, after release, the income slowed to a halt, and one or more new games needed to be made in order to resume bringing in money. The existing library could still be bought retroactively by new fans, and a game's fan base could grow down the line, but that was usually limited to rare cases and was unreliable to keep companies alive in the short term. Pretty easy to grasp economic concepts. There are people who say, well, I remember the days when games released perfectly. That's not entirely correct. I don't mean any disrespect to speedrunners, as I fully acknowledge the planning and skill to do that professionally, of which I don't have anything close, but many of them beat games in 2.5 minutes due to glitches and bugs. Clearly games weren't made perfect decades ago. But beating games quickly aside, many of those games were amazing. They were enough engaging fun that they reached a massive audience that wanted to play them. The more money that can be made off of a single game's purchase per player, however, the less of a priority it is for those big companies to move more units to broaden their fan base past that foundation of people desperate to dump every penny of their assets into each new production. I've talked about WWE, they look at it the same exact way. T-shirts and the immense sea of other merchandise they make available is basically the same as electronic skins and DLC. If they offer enough of that stuff and they sell it to people who feel like collectors, they technically don't need to sell as many tickets. Technically. Unfortunately, the less tickets they sell and the less people watch the programming, the more trouble they have meeting bottom lines and they lose support. No amount of merch or DLC will save them at that point. Again, I'm not saying people should buy every single piece of useless merch that WWE produces. I'm saying WWE should put out better programming that a wider fan base wants to watch, so they at least feel buying some of that useless merch is worth it and has some meaning beyond just fanaticism and the ritualistic sacrifice of one's funds and lifeblood to show their loyalty to a big name brand. Same thing with gaming. I'm not saying we should all cry crocodile tears for poor EA and Activision as they struggle through the weary, dreary development cycles. I'm saying they should stop covering over their lack of interest in games with band-aids like DLC and microtransactions. They should put out better games with deeper or vaster customization. In that way, the microtransactions that are left are at least more compelling and more of an unnecessary option instead of being a major part of their profit generation. Here's a hard pill to swallow though. If you think not buying Battlefront 2 or Call of Duty World War II or Shadow of War means you're part of some huge and powerful revolution, I'm sorry to say that's kind of inaccurate, and I'll explain why. Imagine this scenario. Let's say you sit down with the president of EA and you tell him, sir, I am not buying Battlefront 2. Two things will happen. One is that he'll go into full salesman mode. Oh, you're not? But it's Star Wars, man. It's so cool. We added more heroes and maps, lots of cool new things. The kids are loving it. Why aren't you getting in on it? Or he'll brush it off like it's nothing. Well, I'm sorry to hear we couldn't bring you in this time. Maybe our next big production will be for you. And he'll give you that attitude because when you tell him, I'm taking my $60 elsewhere, good day to you, sir. He's thinking that $60 could have been really nice wiping his ass or picking up dog shit in his hallway. You taking your $60 elsewhere or waiting for a Steam sale is pennies compared to the next big advancement in microtransaction technology or using promotion and marketing to add even just 10 new players worth a good $500 per unit sold to their consumer base. I get the idea of boycotts. I get the idea of taking your money elsewhere. I'm actively doing it more myself. If you're on that train, I'm right there with you. But trust me, boycotts alone are not enough to make a dent for them to care, especially when the industry is busy differentiating between consumers unwilling to buy microtransactions and those that are. There's growing emphasis in the game industry on identifying, quote, whales. In other words, those players who spend exorbitant amounts of money in microtransactions after they buy a game. For us to tell those big executives that we're not spending $60 on a game full of microtransactions is a lot like saying to a fisherman who regularly catches actual physical whales that they didn't get any guppies today. You mean to tell me a fisherman who regularly bags gigantic sea creatures doesn't bat an eye when you tell them tiny bait didn't make it into their nets? Do you think that bothers them? Not a chance. The more people that boycott, the more whales get bred. So how do we get out of this? How do they get out of this? Here's how it shapes up to me. Big companies want money while we want better value, right? The only way to help those big companies stop tapping those veins is to offer them alternatives. We got to say to them, look, we realize you've dug yourself into a dirty, filthy, diseased ditch and are having a really hard time getting yourself out of it. Tell you what, we'll gladly get you out of there, but you need to work with us. And if they quadruple down on loot boxes and microtransactions, which they are unquestionably bound to do, then the only other way to truly show those big companies what's what is to chip away at their foundation. Confront those whales who pay out the anus for randomized loot boxes and worthless cosmetics, things that should come standard in the game already, with exactly how much they're spending and if what they're getting is really worth it, especially when they haven't even thought of playing the last game they spent thousands of dollars on over a year or more ago. Remind those whales of the days when games used to come fully loaded with vast options for customization, both with gameplay elements or cosmetic elements, sometimes both. A scary thing to remember here, some people these days live for the rush of sacrificing tons of money to show just how much of a fanatic they are. Telling people like those that we got those things for free, they'll look at us like we're not real fans. And I'll admit, the sliver of truth to that isn't that a true fan is willing to pay. The sliver of truth there is that games should be worth paying for. Stopping whales from getting their rush by pushing big publishers to remove microtransactions from games doesn't stop them from being addicted to that rush, and in many cases, that may very well just transition to anger at people trying to help them. Much in the same way drug addicts or substance abusers get angry at friends and loved ones who want to keep them from overdosing or emptying their bank accounts. You want to deal damage to EA and Activision's microtransactions plans, we need interventions before the whales create their own movement to insist microtransactions are needed in games, if it's not being done so already. Players and communities shoved a massive shard of glass into the chest cavity of EA, getting them to backstep their microtransactions from Star Wars Battlefront 2, and that's great for people looking forward to playing that game and not feeling required to dump additional funds into it just to have fun. However, if EA pulls that shard of glass out, they could very well hemorrhage and bleed out. Yeah, I just said that with a straight face. Believe me, I fully realize that it doesn't sound like a sane statement, just like it doesn't sound sane to say WWE could completely fold despite ticket sales plummeting. They may be a huge company, and these all might be giant, powerful companies, but they're not invincible. If they lose enough public support, income streams, sponsors, or shareholders, they're done. Most of them will do whatever shit business they have to stay in the game, though sometimes that strength boost is more temporary than we perceive. Call of Duty almost acts like a steroid shot or performance enhancer for Activision. Without it, what are they? Average? Weak? Limp, unimpressive, and doesn't it shrink your balls? I'm pretty sure it shrinks balls. Even if that's a rumor, better to stay away from Call of Duty and not risk it shrinking your balls. That's my recommendation. However, when one gets released, what happens to Activision? They get a jolt of power, and in between Call of Duty games, they're on that downslope, and they sometimes lose muscle mass until they get the next dose. They become highly dependent. They put microtransactions in for the income they get from players. They risk making the gaming community furious at them for ruining the art of gaming. They take them out. They risk their shareholders and sponsors pulling support and taking severe losses. They have junkies seething for them to sell them the junk they need, and suppliers desperate for the money from the junk they sell. Meanwhile, Call of Duty is busy doing nothing to discourage the growing toxicity, racism, volatility, and other unpleasantness in its community, and Warframe encourages people to work together. I wouldn't have Trinity Prime or Saren Prime if it weren't for friends helping me farm relics for specific blueprints, which granted does take a little away from the I got this myself satisfaction I was feeling with Diablo 3 when they made most of their legendary and set items account bound, but I also didn't pay any money for those Prime frames. And I'd rather a community be known for helping each other than being full of over-competitive alphas. My friends and I were able to work together to overcome that challenge, and I feel great helping my one friend get his favorite Warframe Valkyrie Prime, and I feel great helping my other friend by using standing points to buy mods from a syndicate who hates him, and none of that required any money either. When you remove the monetary aspect of the relationship, you can focus on the fantasy and fun games actually offer. It's partially true that when you don't invest any money, a thing risks losing you because there isn't as much of an investment, but when a game is as well put together as Warframe, it isn't the money that keeps you invested, your genuine interest keeps you invested. We look at player microtransactions being glorified gambling and say the big companies are at fault, and I agree, it's very shitty for them to pull. However, big companies invest money not just in games, but the promotion to keep them visible enough to sell it all. They don't get back as much as they need to make up for all those costs, and that doesn't mean at all that microtransactions like randomized loot boxes is the right or ethical way to make up those costs. It's not right or ethical, but we sometimes get shocked or surprised when we hear some of those companies report losses despite our perception that they're rolling in cash. Well, of course they're reporting losses or lower income than projected. They get backlash from microtransactions, not as many people buy them. Their entire business model becomes damage control so they can continue to cover up sales figures, or they frame stats to make them look better than they are, or they inflate claims to make the strongest fans spread the word that they're not doing as bad as they seem to be. The better the marketing and community management, the better they cover up their failings, but if they don't address the things that are actually losing fans and customers deep down, eventually those failings will be all they have, and shutting down or closing up shop won't be a potential that can be avoided, it'll be an inevitability. And again, please don't misunderstand, this isn't implying that it's the players who are at fault for not buying any of that shit. They're not. Gamers don't deserve to have fantasy worlds they're passionate about treated like digital portals to transport their money into the pockets of those looking to sadistically take advantage of those fantasies. I'm saying those big companies are only digging themselves further into holes with less and fewer viable ways of getting out. Taking advantage of us this way doesn't help them as much as it seems. This is just as much a message to them as it is to us. I don't want to see good game companies turn into bad ones as they have been. I don't want to see game companies, big or small, close up shop if it can be helped, just like I don't want to see WWE, which used to be the best pro wrestling product out there and has since fallen severely from grace, close up shop either. I'd like to think that if the EAs and Activisions and Ubisofts of the world were all to go away, that'd leave us with indie devs. Independent developers could rise to become the new gaming industry, and hopefully if that were to happen, their care and passion for the art of making great games stays intact, and the fact that they become the new industry doesn't corrupt them. Let me rephrase a previous question in a nicer way. What do the biggest publishers need to do in order to feel less compelled to offer big AAA games without microtransactions? What are some alternatives? I have a couple ideas. Maybe they're shit. Feel free to give your opinions. For instance, what would happen if companies like Activision teamed up with really small developers or companies that are working on much smaller games with much shorter development times? Activision could invest a fraction of what they'd pay to fund the next Call of Duty into a really small game project that could take an eighth of the time to build, QA, and ship, and as long as they pick the right small company project and they keep from micromanaging into oblivion, allow those small company devs to create the art they're good at creating, Activision could start pulling in profits from this small indie project they help out. It may not be as much profit as crummy microtransaction loot box gambling cards in the new Call of Duty World War II, but if it means keeping microtransaction bullshit out of a new high-profile game, and they can look hip by giving a boost to more artsy titles, they make pretty much everyone happier in the gaming community. With the exception of whales maybe, who would likely make the excuse that they have to accomplish things or quote work for them in order to get what they want with no paid way of gambling until the game allows them to have what they want. Releasing a variety of big and small games would bring in far more players to their camp, and at the same time, they allow the bigger productions more time to cook and simmer until they're fully ready. Like I said, big companies want money, we want better value. We get more games of varying levels of production value, but overall, most games made well with integrity in mind, and meanwhile, they get the money they want, and they can stop poking and prodding our wallets as if they only care about one thing. Hey, Activision, up here. My eyes are up here. Another idea for you. I'll stay on Activision because they've done enough to deserve criticism. They've come a long way from River Raid. Check the description for a little view of my childhood. Think back to Destiny. That game was predicted to be the best game ever made. It was looking to take the world by storm, and to Activision and Bungie's credit, it does have a lot of players. It has done okay. But at Destiny 1's launch, the lore and story were broken, splintered, gutted. It was barely there. None of it made sense. Not to mention the one redeeming quality it had, the loot system and progression were completely fucked. Legendary quality purple engrams barely showed up, and when they did, they were sometimes giving out uncommon and common quality items, which is unacceptable. There were no reliable sources of high quality exotic items, as even the extra hard Nightfall strikes and one raid activity were giving out barely any equipment that was useful. Maybe that's because Activision over micromanaged it, sabotaged it, and turned what could have been the greatest game of all time into a shared world RPG shooter that may be better than Call of Duty, but was way worse and less fun than Borderlands or Skyrim. That's my theory anyway. Maybe Bungie was used to telling stories and didn't know how to appropriately develop an RPG style game. They had good storytelling credit with Halo, but for Destiny to release in the state it did tells me a story of a large power dumbing down a deep game thinking they need to cater to the Call of Duty crowd. Maybe it's a combination of the two. But imagine for a moment if Destiny 1 hadn't done pre-orders or full purchases and instead gone the way of a game that was already available for play for at least a year. Warframe. Per Wikipedia, Warframe's closed beta on Windows PC started October 2012, with an open beta starting March 2013, while Destiny 1 released on PS4 and Xbox One September 2014, more than a year later. Now granted, if anyone in an Activision boardroom mentioned Warframe at that time, they probably condescended the fuck out of it. If Activision was looking to make a killing in the market like it had already been doing with Call of Duty in the past, a little free-to-play game by some indie outfit likely wasn't even on its radar, but hell with it. Devil's advocate. Destiny's only a few years old. Let's say Destiny 1 released the exact same way as Warframe. They say to players, we're reworking this whole thing, but we're not charging for it. Download it for free, check it out, play, discuss in the community, see how you feel, and we'll adjust based on feedback. We're going to put a real money cash shop in the game for those who want to contribute to development. You can buy any specific items or equipment you want directly, no random loot box shit, but all the items can be acquired in the game organically with no money required. I know that still seems somewhat unethical, charging money for early access in-game items, but look at it this way. There are indie publishers who did similar things and didn't take in enough money to stay alive. There are games that need Kickstarter money to even get finished, and some of those devs just give up and don't bother. That's a big part of the risk. Those tiny companies and developers attempt to make one game. They go all in and need that money just to keep the doors open on the project. If they don't get enough attention or donations, they die and look like pieces of shit for taking people's money and running. Now, if a company as big as Activision were to do that, the chances that they would shut down when this big a high-profile alpha is in process, would that really endanger Activision itself that much? Especially if they take all the feedback and make people happy. That's the whole point of early access. The community guides the experience to being as close to perfect as possible, and the quote final product was what works best. All Activision would have to do is just keep from Vince McMahon like micromanaging and just let the devs develop. Let them create art instead of a platform to con money out of people for no good reason. But then again, with this type of thing, they'd be able to bring in money a lot earlier. A high profile early access for something other than an open world zombie apocalypse survival game may yield some interesting results if the developers on hand were as dedicated to creating something as unique as Warframe has been. Sony's H1Z1 may have been an experiment in high profile early access that undoubtedly failed, but open open world and or zombie games and or survival games and or multiplayer only games are already on pretty shaky ground. If the right type of open-ended experience is done justice with big enough corporate backing, enough charm and heart behind it that they really want to engage players on emotional and passionate levels, I don't think this should entirely be out of the question. Believe me when I tell you that I hate microtransactions and pay-to-play games as much as anyone else, and despite my attempts to try and figure out why big publishers insist on putting them in games, I would love to see them disappear and never come back. I just fear that pushing big publishers to simply remove them without any replacement for the income stream may cause them and us more harm than good. But they deserve it, you might say. They've been gouging our wallets long enough, they deserve to be taken down hard. I honestly don't disagree with that. The type of business model that thinks it's healthy to bleed consumers of every dollar for the least amount of substance is absolutely evil and wrong. However, meeting wrath with wrath isn't working either. Think about it. Microtransactions and loot boxes started as little tiny shit mobile game techniques by shit developers who just wanted to offer, quote, games to users of popular mobile devices, and despite increasing distaste from high-profile YouTube critics and personalities, those little microtransactions have been allowed to reach this level of normality in full AAA console and PC releases. At this point, massive fan backlash is now required to occur before they're pulled back even a tiny little bit. That shows me beyond clearly that when we fight back against them, they push even harder, and since they make the games, they can make the decisions, and they will pull rank on this on the most polite PR ways possible. Don't get this wrong for a second though. This isn't to say we should give up fighting back against it, but they're not looking to give up that fight either. I implied earlier that I wouldn't be against a massive game industry collapse and hoping quality indie devs rise to the surface, but that's not likely to happen. If it does, it won't happen fast enough to replace the industry on the whole. More likely, one company like EA or Ubisoft or Square Enix will fall, or just falter enough to get bought out fully by another company that's just as strong until there are only maybe, I don't know, pulling number of the year, 2 big companies left. No idea which 2 it'd be, but 2 sounds like a reasonable number to expect to go head to head in an industry war. Sega versus Nintendo, WWE versus WCW, PC versus Apple, PlayStation versus Xbox. Sound familiar? These things always end in 2s, and only during rare moments does one side of the giant fucking balls to go, yeah, we're just gonna buy you out now, you're done, we win. And when big companies left to create a monopoly, they get lazy as fuck. Look what happened when WWE didn't have WCW to fight with anymore. They stayed popular for a while, but they kept messing up storylines and fucking up character building and pushing the wrong, quote, superstars. They leaned hard on John Cena for over a bloody decade and bled people dry of every dollar they could spend on a rainbow of his colorful t-shirts, and now WWE looks like a joke because they weren't thinking outside the box, they weren't improving TV quality, and they were shooting themselves in the foot repeatedly, then slapping band-aids on their open wounds. In a capitalist society, competition tends to mean the best things for consumers, right? What I see happening, at least in the game industry, is competing entities mimicking each other's techniques and changing trends while hiding behind the illusion of some fictional rivalries. There may be more than 2 huge publishing entities, but most of those big entities are doing the same things, causing all of us to adjust our views on what's normal. It's like when gas prices inch their way up. They're able to do that because when you see a regular comparison constantly, you instinctively make the best choice of what's cheapest in the market until one day you pass a station, you find yourself uttering, $5 a gallon, that's a bargain. You're like, whoa, wait, fuck this. No more gas for me. Goddamn war for oil. Oh, I'm almost empty. All right, I'll just put it on the card. Those big entities are essentially colluding via the market to get the most out of us. Even if they never speak, they're still working together. It's win-win for all of them to follow those trends and do these things. Microtransactions are a trend for most companies now. It's not a future problem. It's a present day problem. Most huge publishers are doing it, and now it looks completely legit to new gamers and people looking to jump on the bandwagon. We become overtaken by it, and yet I have faith that it's not too late to fix this. Should more game companies follow Digital Extreme's lead and make games using Warframe's pay model and kind of alpha access approach to open-ended high-profile games? Should more big companies go in and invest with tiny indie companies to bring in profits to supplement what they'd make from useless DLC content? I don't think either would be that dumb an idea. Like I said, the right genre of game, the right developers, the right style of creativity, the right new game, it could work. There are safe ways to do it, and they wouldn't have to overinvest or take too much risk, and they could start bringing in money way sooner than if they wait for a game to appear, quote, complete, then run damage control and the community flips out over ridiculous microtransactions or stupid design errors. A big company like EA eases into development, they stay transparent with a new community of people, they build trust in a subset branch of their company while working on this new project. New fans get to feel like they're part of the growth. It may take a while, but it's worth it in the long run. It's way more ethical than charging an arm and a leg for a game that's supposed to be complete and isn't even close. It's far less sleazy than gambling scams that they have to scrounge in the dirt and grime and filth to find just the right hook to convince people it's okay when nothing about it is okay. Gaming shouldn't be about which players pay the most money. Gaming is a fantasy. It's an escape, a chance for all of us, no matter what background we come from, no matter what our home lives are like, or who our families are, or where we're from, to feel unbelievably powerful while living in a real world that makes us feel flimsy, weak, and fragile. And for those real world issues of socioeconomics to take a major foothold in those fantasies is unquestionably the wrong direction to go in. I'll end this on something from one of my favorite movies, and I don't have many, but this is definitely a guilty pleasure. Bring on the judgment. In the original Wayne's World, the owner of Noah's Arcade is describing a new game called Xantar to Rob Lowe's evil corporate character Benjamin. Xantar, if you recall, is, quote, a gelatinous Gelatinous cube that eats warriors in a medieval village, and every time you eat a chieftain, you ascend to a higher level. The beauty part is you can't get to the next level, so the kids keep coughing up quarters. Benjamin snickers and summarizes by saying, gelatinous cube eats village. I think it's terrific. You know, I know nothing about video games, and I found what you just said riveting. Link is in the description if you don't like my acting, but tell me with a straight face that that doesn't encapsulate what most of us think of when we imagine game publishing executives pondering their next big project. Not knowing what gaming is really like or caring a single bit about video games themselves as living, breathing worlds that we want to jump into and lose ourselves in, but still wanting gamers' money as if they empathize even a little bit. Problem is, even if they started caring, they're so afraid of not hitting bottom lines that pulling all that shitty business back, either at all or for long, is seeming less and less like a viable option. Unless they have an out from this microtransaction nonsense, they may never change. There are solutions, but they're going to be harder to implement than we think, and they may not be what our anger and rage want them to be. This is Killer Cardinal DA7 reminding you to use your head, be nice to each other, and take the time to think. Talk to you later.
First, Vaheg thinks, I will let this plague run wild over Cetus. Then he thinks, I will use poison to exterminate the infestation once its work is done. The Quills see doom in his plan. For Grenier and Ostron alike, the boil needs to be destroyed now, before it becomes unstoppable.